One dungeon ties it all together. The Crystal Tower Alliance Raid Series, Alexander, and Omega. That dungeon is the Twinning. Everyone said I should do it, and you were all right. Now, the Twinning takes place after Shadowbringers MSQ, but before the patch MSQ. And it's an interesting lull in the narrative, because at this stage, Novrand is saved, yet your friends are stuck. And in this context, we're going into the Crystal Tower, and look, I just finished this like a few hours ago, and holy shit, this is so satisfying. Because, of course, your original story, the actual thing that happens to the Warrior of Light, is not the one that you play. Because you die shortly after Stormblood. And while not quite the quantum suicide thought experiment, it may as well be that, for there's a second you, and they're dead. Just that really that's the first you, and you are the second you. Ish. Timeline diverging. This is how it happens. How the hell do they pull this off? Okay, so it's time to play through Garland Ironworks' greatest creation. Now, before this, of course, you, Cid, and the crew quested together, unlocking the Crystal Tower and meeting G'raha, falling, of course, into the whole Alexander time loop, and, you know, the whole Omega saga. And if you're interested in those, well, they're some of the more recent videos on this channel. We've got time stuff. We've got the interdimensional rift. It's all mad, and it's floating around Cid's mind. And this is where it's hard to begin, so I think this is where I'm going to begin. After Gimlet Dark, the Crystal Exarch finally succeeds in bringing you to the First. Of course, only after accidentally nabbing many of the other Scions. We learn, though, that no matter what happens, that our world is doomed, and that the First is where our destiny lies. Then, of course, the whole Shadowbringers MSQ happens. We learn of the ancient history, we take a cosmology lesson with Urianger that is very important to all this, and yes, we prevent the light calamity that, when combined with the Guardian Black Rose superweapon, causes the 8th Umbral Calamity, and the original death of the Warrior of Light, and I think presumably the Scions. So, somewhat like an Alexander, you save yourself, because you originally died, but you couldn't call yourself to save yourself. That task fell to Cid, Nero, and the Garland gang. And right as your character has worked all of this stuff out, it's basically time to crank up the tunes and head into the Twinning. The light calamity is averted at this stage, but your friends are still stuck, and the Crystal Tower needs to be investigated, so in we go. And through this dungeon, we learn via the datapads of Garland Ironworks' 200-year undertaking to, well, not save themselves. You know, instead to, for the greater good, create a timeline that avoided the world-defining disaster that was the 8th Umbral Calamity. At that point, G'raha was awakened, the whole tower plot was enacted, but the world was still in this, dire state. So we see these messages from future Garland Ironworks. It's a really cool dungeon as well. I mean, all of these, ideas are, as lofty as they get, right? And then just get a load of the music. As soon as I zoned into this, we had, the rave emote, one of the people was playing that, and it fit. And of course, the music, they're having fun. They're remixing Syracuse Tower and Omega, later sprinkling the Alexander music. It's a beautiful dungeon that draws it all together, and it then just slowly dawns on you. You're like, hey, that looks a bit like Alexander. That's a screen from Omega. Look at these research terminals. Then you read the datapads detailing the Garland Ironworks process of making the whole thing happen. The portal opened by Xandi's throne to the world of darkness is in fact just a portal to the 13th, which is a world that fell to dark aspected etheric imbalance. So funny enough, just like how we travel to the First, in Shadowbringers, we actually travel to the 13th at the end of A Realm Reborn. Of course, the Crystal Tower, Xandi's throne, that can, sort of break between the different reflections. Then, of course, we learn of the dimensional rift tech of Omega that would allow us to do the traversal. The time manipulation abilities of Alexander, the Machine Primal. And by combining all of this, we learn that yes, they were able to leverage G'raha being part of the tower and then send him back and to the First, so that he could nab you before you get killed, so that you could save the First, so that the Black Rose doesn't, have its whole situation? Because, of course, it was in trying to save you that Cid was eventually able to garner support for Garland Ironworks, because after you died, he had the whole plan sounded so grim of, trying to rewrite the past, change things. But then he realizes, okay, no, it's bring back the Warrior of Light. That's how we need to frame it. And then that is what, in the other timeline, makes Garland Ironworks basically happen and find that success. It's so mad and loopy, and I mean, hey, I kind of love alternate universe and time travel stuff. Not gonna lie. Big Trek fan, that is how it is. So, all of this stuff is just steeping around in my head when I'm doing the dungeon. I'm sure it was the same for you. What else then? Well, beyond the direct lore, it's just an incredible dungeon. I mean, the scale is I think awesome is the right word. The fights are fun, and, then you start to look close. And, things don't look like what they looked like when you were in the Crystal Tower in A Realm Reborn, because this is the tower 200 years in the future, moving into the first. Some of the enemies look like little Alexanders. There's modern-looking tech. There's Omega-style screens. Then, oh wait, looking, close to the enemy colors, especially the final boss. Oh, those are the colors of Garland Ironworks. So yes, the reason why we go into the tower in the first place is because some etheric imbalance or disturbance has happened, and that's activated all of these machines. So we then have to wonder, what did that? What activated all these security measures? And then, of course, of note, too, is that the Tycoon fight, it's just such a fun mashup of Alexander, Omega, and the Ironworks. And then, of course, what do we see behind it? Well, we see those, Omega sort of, view screen things. This is so cool. And there's something about how it's done that really, I think especially, too, with the short story, it just, makes the enormity of all of what happens kind of hit home. I think triply so when, by Quest's end, we hear from Biggs the Third, talking 200 years in the future. That's just such a great moment, and that one dungeon can so successfully tie together lore built across 3 expansions is just wild. And the thing is that, from what I understand, they didn't have a master plan. They didn't write Alexander knowing this would happen. They wrote all those things to be decently open-ended, self-contained stories, and I think they've said as much in interviews. But what's key is their ability to actually pull the threads together to create something from the incredible possibilities that they set up. They deliver on the possibilities they create in a way that makes sense and feels up to date with the current story that they're telling. And I think that's what really makes FF14 a cut above the rest and so satisfying. Okay, so by this stage, we've been through Alexander, Omega, Shadowbringers, and the Twinning. And that means there's plenty to talk about. Alt's timelines are a bit mad. I mean, clearly, G'raha and Shadowbringers thinks that by preventing the conditions that caused Garland Ironworks to wake him up and send him back, that he would wipe out his own existence and destroy the tower, right? Because if that world doesn't fall to light, right, then the etheric, stuff that causes the Black Rose to be so powerful doesn't happen. So that whole timeline literally just doesn't happen, and then he thinks he'll disappear. Now that would be, I guess, one way to resolve the, causal paradox, right? Go back in time, kill your own grandfather, you don't exist anymore. How did you kill your own grandfather? Because he didn't exist. But that's clearly not how time is working here. Now, I don't want to just go and invoke the double slit experiment and the sort of many worlds interpretation as a very light plot device. I don't want to tie it to actual physicsy things, because that maybe would be a bit preposterous, but it's kind of like that principle, that a true choice merely creates another timeline where that choice went that way. So it's more an alternative universe adjacent to ours, where Time's arrow continued onward. No one's looping back at anyone, but Time's arrow continued forward. But, where an event happened differently, and that causes the branching off point. Meaning that both timelines are real and valid. Meaning that you lived your whole life, but in Stormblood, G'raha did not call you, and so you went to fight in the war so effectively that Black Rose was deployed, which killed you. You would have never known that, though, because for that to happen, for everything to happen, you needed to die. Cid would then need to set his entire plan into motion, and everything else would need to happen. So that timeline, 200 years beyond us, just continues on. Who knows what Biggs the Third is doing right now? But we do know that sending the Crystal Tower awakened Midgardsormr, who, of course, himself had pledged to protect the world. And that's an interesting thing, given the Midgardsormr, Hydaelyn Pact. So, yes, there is a version of the world where that is what happened, and, it's more in Midgardsormr's hands now, you could say. Gráha didn't disappear whenever all of this was resolved, meaning that alternate timeline, I think, surely didn't disappear either. I very much doubt we're ever going to go there, but it's just that interesting exploration of, like, if this happened, this is what those characters would do. And it's one of those things where, like, an alt timeline view of a character can tell you a lot about the characters in our timeline, about, like, how they react in a situation. When done well in a way that doesn't destroy lore, it's a great way to explore a what if that actually just teaches us about the characters. Now, as for what activated the bots and the twinning, I just have no idea. I mean, Gráha didn't disappear. Could it have been connected to that? It's kind of hard to know given all the mind-bending technology that's at work here. Speaking of which, though, I've got to go back to Alexander. So, the big question, how much of this did Alexander see? Well, not see, more simulate and predict. And that's the interesting thing with Alexander. Computationally, something like him would be, near impossible. But nobody built Alexander. But having the tech to build Alexander didn't matter because Alexander was a primal. All you need is the faith, the belief in the idea that is all in the Enigma Codex, and then, boom, he exists. And that's a funny way for just how all of this works to essentially get around the technical challenge of creating a machine powerful enough to run complete ancestor sort of simulations, which it seems Alexander is able to do. So could Alexander see Black Rose, but not what would cause the Black Rose to go haywire, i.e., could Alexander see the source, but not the first? We don't know. That's an interesting question. I think the biggest reading of all, though, is that Alexander simulated everything, and that computationally is fine because he's not a robot, he's a primal, summoned in based on a perfect design, so the perfect design is true. So if he saw all of that, then he knew that Cid's knowledge from meeting him would be key, and that the Warrior of Light would be key, which Alexander already told us during the Alexander fight. So it's like this crazy thing where Alexander literally could have made the entire thing happen, and if that troublesome event did not happen during Heavensward, the whole thing would have been impossible, and the Warrior of Light would have died at Gimlet Dark. So then, did Alexander leave any help? Did he leave parts behind? Help for Cid? Who knows? But ultimately, Alexander fulfilled his goal. And it actually somewhat confirms that we are canonically in the best timeline. That's kind of nice for once. Omega, then. Thinking about this is fun, and there's a short story, A World Forsaken, that details Omega's first-person account of this. Well, okay, Omega. It's the cute little robot, but many people believe that Omega kind of did a consciousness transfer into the cute little robot at the end of the Omega Raid series, or at least something to that effect. But basically, the Omega bot can't express that, it's actually very aware. It can't express that outwardly. So it's this lovely little detail, and the short story is just wonderful. Of course, it's got a tearful end, as everything with this team does. And, for a robot, how do they do this so well? God, they're so good writers. But I love the idea, though, that Omega is learning from us. That Omega literally learns hope. And, all the experience Omega gets living with Alpha and the other humans. And probably then that this little Omega bot actually aids Biggs the Third and co. in working out and, traveling through the rift. And that actually means that the Omega Raid series is directly responsible for saving us. So just like how if Alexander didn't happen, if Omega didn't happen, the Warrior of Light canonically gets killed by Black Rose. Now, of course, Omega does turn up near the end of Endwalker, like the little Omega bot. So that makes me wonder how they're going to continue him, because of course patch 6.1 has an Omega quest. And through this short story, we know that little robot probably is actual Omega, or at least a copy or a something of Omega. And also for the short story, by the way, which you gotta read, but the Cid Nero moments are really great in it. And just the Ironworks, what a bunch. I mean, hell, the whole, just this whole thing, the mashup of the Alexander and Omega themes with Circus Tower and all of that, the way that the lyrics pretty much fit. I mean, that is a testament to how well woven all of this is, because the lyrics that fit Diane can also fit G'raha. And it's the sort of thing where even if that wasn't planned, they ensured that it all worked, and seemingly with great care. So I absolutely loved the Twinning Dungeon. The Twinning was a way to show through gameplay like a moment in history, a place that is central to how this entire plot line happened. And I think that by experiencing that in gameplay, you get so much more of just a deep appreciation for the Garland Ironworks story. And it certainly means that the next time we see Cid and the boys, I mean, you know, you're like, you just have that appreciation, right? You kind of know, oh, well, in this timeline where me and the other Scions die, this is what you guys all went and did, and we know you did that. It's just a fun way to add some depth to those characters. And it's just like, you know, time travel can be done really badly. Obviously, it can kill franchises and stuff. But if I think of, like, the best of a time travel or a mirror universe episode in Trek, it's, you know, when it's telling you something about the characters in that situation, right? You know, how would they act? The kind of the what ifs that still let you feel who a character is, that is still applicable to the character that you know in your timeline. So that they did this in a way that honestly is pretty clean, where while you could sit down and try to be like, oh, what about the paradoxes? I think there's a simple enough read where just this literally all works just fine. And I just think it's beautiful how they tied it all together. And to be able to pull off a plot of this scope and magnitude this well is so damn impressive. And while the likes of a Forsaken World, a short story, do, I think, reinforce all of this, and, you know, while this dungeon is an optional dungeon, the plot works without them because you at least know all of the key facts. So it's all there properly in-game. But absolutely this is a case where optional content is optional, but you really should do it. You really should do it because it's going to elevate your appreciation of the experience. And of course, once you do it, you unlock a few new things to put into your sort of daily Spotify rotation. And that's pretty nice. So there you go. The Twinning. The Twinning is awesome. Look at this. I've got 17 minutes and 40 seconds of recording about a goddamn dungeon. That's not what I'm used to a dungeon just being, you know, you go in, it caps off a little story and you're done. This one is, oh wow. Just, yeah. Hey, I love science fiction. I love timey-wimey bullshit. I also love fantasy. So when I get all of these things just thrown into the blender and, you know, taste delicious at the other end, brilliant. So, thank you, FF14 team. I cannot wait to hop into the new Alliance raid series in 6.1. And now that I have done, you know, the past raid series and stuff like that, I'm just going to be thinking, like, Myths of the Realm, what does it mean? What can I read into this? And that just makes me so much more excited, and excited for reasons that aren't just gameplay. And, you know, that's pretty damn cool. I'm just so used to a raid dungeon, or a raid being like, hey, just, whatever, go do the raid. Go do the dungeon. And, you know, maybe you'll get a cinematic at the end. But there's just something about the way it's done here I love. Yes, game, I'm enamored with you. Thank you, everyone, for ushering me on to do all of this and for all your support. Have a wonderful day. Do the Twinning if you haven't done the Twinning, and I'll see you next time.